you've spoken out about this issue at home on repeated occasions. One thing I think people might ask is, if you have the right to be on the board, and you've been on a board, what is the reason that people don't want to become or try to run for the board? What are the stumbling blocks, and how can we help make it better for people to be part of the governance of their co-ops?
As a board member, what I come to realize, people get the ballots, their proxies. All they see is names on a proxy. They do not know who the person is or what their qualifications are, and that's been a standard since I've been in my cooperative for over 20 years. People do not campaign just like politicians campaign for their positions. So this way you get to know who the person is. So they feel, oh, well, this is the same name I keep seeing year after year after year, so they must be good, so I'll vote for them. But see, I feel people need to... Even though I live in Yonkers, I know who you are. So. But see, people have to understand, just like politicians, whenever you run for a position, campaign. Let them know what your qualifications are and what are you bringing to the community. In my cooperative, I have a treasurer who's been there over 25 years. Because he's been the treasurer for 25 years, no one has ever questioned his qualifications or what he has done. We still have fuse boxes. We still have, rusted plumbing. Nothing has been done. And people have not questioned. Okay. So this is another thing. So, this is what we have to face.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Well, thank you,
Thank you
for your testimony. I just have a really quick question. Is there any way for the shareholders to force either the local municipality or the state to do an audit for the building in order to figure out whether or not the actual fees and the maintenance that you're being paid into your cooperative are actually being used for the maintenance of the property itself?
Well, see, that's something I also question, but I come to realize when you live in a co-op such as the one I live in, which is a market value co-op, you would have to hire your own attorney. We have to go by the business cooperative laws. And a lot of people do not want to invest their money to find out what's going on. They say, oh, it's working. Why? I'm the only one who's raising sand, so to speak, so let Barbara suffer. But now they're seeing, due to the fact that they were complacent in what was going on in our community, drugs have come into the community. So now they want to do something about it, but they don't want to fight. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. Is it, I sort of deal with this in a different way where I really try to organize tenants in my district to form tenants associations, and sometimes it's quite difficult to do so. But have you gotten any outside help? I know that Assemblywoman Mayer has been really an advocate and a fighter for you, but has there been any other resources that you've been able to get in terms of your fight with this co-op?
I have spoken recently with an attorney who's willing to work with us pro bono if I could get 12 people to come and fight for the cause. Sure. But they're afraid to fight because of the fact that our co-op is run by one family, and they're afraid of problems that they may have to face if they stand up against them, such as they have the keys to the apartments. They have all your personal records in the office. And they've been there for almost 40 years, so they're saying, if I stand out against them, what's going to happen to me? So this is why they won't stand up.
And how many units are in?
480 units,
400?
10 buildings.
That's a big development.
Huge.
Yeah.
10 buildings, 48 apartments per building.
Wow.
Yes.
So you're getting on co-op city levels. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to, excuse me, 1 second, Ms. Conlon. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I was intrigued by your idea about the shareholder Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Hopefully, maybe you can submit to the committee at some point, future point, some of your ideas, what should be on that shareholder Bill of Rights. And maybe we can mandate that it be disseminated to all residents upon their tenancy, something like that. All right, so we can create something, maybe this committee can create something like that. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Gail's not here yet. So why don't we call up the staff attorneys from the Legal Aid Society, Jason Wu, Jacques David, Aiden Sultran. Did I pronounce the names correctly? Kind of, sort of? Well, please correct it for the record. Now, I see you have a rather extensive testimony here.
That's correct. We are lawyers.
You can try and give us the abridged version.
For sure.
7 pages? Very thorough, I see.
Yes.
So please feel free to give us the abridged version.
Certainly,
You
certainly.
concur, Mr. Pachado?
I concur, Mr. Chair.
You concur, Mr.
I
Moyer?
concur, Mr.
All
Chair.
right, there you go.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jacques David, and to the other members of the Housing Committee, my name is Jacques David. To my right is Adon Sultran, and further to my right is Jason Wu. We are staff attorneys at the Legal Aid Society. We want to thank the chairman and the members of the Housing Committee for the opportunity to provide testimony today. And this testimony is submitted on behalf of the Legal Aid Society. The Legal Aid Society is, just a brief introduction, is the oldest organization providing legal services, civil legal services, and criminal services to indigent people in the United States and presumably in the world. Annually, on the civil side, annually we assist in 44,000 cases through our immigration practice, our domestic violence practice, our health law practice, as well as our housing practice and public benefits practice. We do this work in 16 courthouse and or neighborhood offices in all of the 5 boroughs. And we also have 22 specialty units in the civil practice. The 3 of us, we practice in 2 of the specialty units. I'm a staff attorney in the Community Development Project. Adon and Jason are attorneys, staff attorneys in the Housing Development Unit. And those 2 units, the Community Development Project and the Housing Unit, do quite a bit of work throughout the 5 boroughs, but particularly in Upper Manhattan, in Harlem and the Bronx, with HDFCs. Our work includes providing legal and technical assistance. That's what distinguishes us. We don't just provide technical assistance, we provide legal assistance as well to HDFCs. That includes providing counsel on corporate governance matters, shareholders' rights, compliance with HDFC governing documents, refinancing debt, negotiating tax arrears with HPD, and negotiating other agreements with the city. The key issues that we're going to address today, well, actually, before I speak about the key, I want to just reiterate something that Ms. Anne-Marie Hendrickson said, that there are a lot of, today we're talking about the challenges that some HDFCs face, but there are a lot of very successful HDFCs, and I think that should not be overlooked. The key issues that we're going to address today include the need for increased oversight, improved training, and better cooperation with third-party managers, and then preserving affordability. And we're gonna briefly talk about those in turn. What I'm prepared to talk about is oversight. HDFCs are incorporated pursuant to the Private Housing Finance Law, and Article 11, Section 572.14 actually provides that in New York City, the supervising agency for HDFC cooperatives is the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Having said that, a lot of HDFCs exist in a vacuum of oversight, and that is a result or because HPD as a supervising agency lacks staffing and resources to actually perform their role as the supervising agency of HDFCs. remedying the lack of enforcement and oversight is central to preserving affordable housing in New York City, and preserving the affordable housing provided by HDFCs. I think Ms. Emery Hendrickson mentioned that in 2003, HDFCs, the department began requiring that HDFCs have regulatory agreements. And that's a great first step in this question around oversight. HDFCs are meant to be self-governing, but not self-regulating. As corporations, they should be self-governing, but not self-regulating. And the fact that more than 75% of the HDFCs that exist in New York City, the fact that they don't have regulatory agreements is a huge problem in this area of oversight. Ms. Hendrickson has mentioned that HPD and the Task Force on City-Owned Property, which the Legal Aid Society is a member of, has looked at ways to address this issue. So we're not just merely noting the problem, we're actually looking for solutions to the problem. And one of them is to consider a new regulatory agreement that would induce a substantial portion of these TIL-created HDFCs to enter into a regulatory agreement for a substantial tax exemption. What the members of the task force are considering is a full tax exemption. I'm not sure where HPD is with respect to the full tax exemption. And again, the regulatory agreement would provide a lot more. The regulatory agreement itself would be a lot stricter with respect to governance, and so that's something that the task force is looking at. But legal aid at the Legal Aid Society, we would also recommend that HPD consider providing more technical assistance and training with an emphasis on corporate governance and best practices. That HPD would also consider a mediation process for addressing shareholder concerns that touch on or implicate good governance. The way to think about shareholders is kind of like them as the canary in the coal mine. Often, you know, before an HDFC cooperative becomes distressed, tenant shareholders themselves are aware of some of the corporate governance issues, but when they complain to HPD, there's really no. It doesn't appear that that HPD has the staffing or mechanisms to address some of these complaints, and they may actually these issues may fester until the HDFC becomes distressed. We also recommend a more streamlined and stricter reporting procedure, and we would also recommend increased audits of both existing and new HDFCs to ensure compliance with affordability and good governance practices.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, committee members.
Capsulize that well, thank you.
I'll try to be fairly brief because I do know that there's a lot of information here. I just want to touch on a few of the major issues that we've seen with buildings that are in the pre-conversion to co-op phase. As legal service providers on the ground, we've noticed that there are some reoccurring issues that directly have affected the outcome and success of some of these HDFCs in the post-conversion phase. The three main sort of issues that we see coming up deal with the training and education of the tenants in the pre-conversion phase, also the transparency and the communication oftentimes between the tenants and the third-party sponsors that Ms. Hendrickson had previously talked about, both in the pre-conversion phase, and I know she was speaking more towards the third-party sponsors or managers in regulatory agreement sort of post-conversion phases. And also, lastly, just the mismanagement of the third-party managers or sponsors. So in terms of the training and education, we've noticed that in a lot of the trainings that HPD provides, because HPD under law is in charge of providing the training and education of the tenants in the buildings, there's a severe knowledge gap that isn't taken into account at times. You're asking people who may have never experienced balancing books, working, understanding financial concepts, governance issues. You're asking them in often short periods of time in condensed trainings to become experts to manage their buildings. We've noticed that specifically in the TIL program, the HPD trainings have been informative, but that gap has become apparent. And it causes quite a problem. In HDFCs or in buildings that are in like the TPT program, for example, the third-party transfer program, where there's a third-party sponsor involved in the process, a lot of times HPD works with UHAB to provide the trainings, and we've noticed that the trainings wind up being in bunches of either 1 to 6 months of condensed training, and as you can imagine, without ongoing training, with these programs that often take several years for conversion to co-op to actually happen, people wind up forgetting, or maybe they need refreshers, or it winds up being insufficient in terms of the training and education. As a solution to these issues, we would propose that the tenants were given a mechanism to evaluate the trainings, to have actual meaningful input in HPD's trainings or the sponsors' trainings. We'd also ask that, like I was saying before, the trainings be more ongoing. HPD should have its own process of reevaluating their own training offerings, and they should be providing the ongoing sort of long-term training, both pre-conversion and post-conversion to HDFC Cooperative. As an additional note, one thing that we have noticed, it's not quite in terms of education, but in terms of the actual sort of informing of the tenants. When the tenants, right at the conversion stage, when they're given the cooperative information package, where they're given all the information about the proprietary leases, the bylaws, all of the corporate governance documents, and it explains what being a shareholder actually is, there's no translation services or actually translated documents of, copies rather, of those governance documents. It's our understanding, and it's been our experience, that there have been summaries provided orally in different languages to kind of make up for that gap, but there's no actual hard copies that are translated. The other issues, I'll breeze through them fairly quickly because, as I mentioned before. Yeah, got you. In terms of the transparency, communication, and mismanagement, what we've noticed in our practice is that sometimes with the third-party developers, although many of them are good and wind up providing successful outcomes for these HDFCs, some lack the transparency and the communication that we think is essential for these co-ops to thrive. I talk in the actual written testimony about an example which is pretty informative, but the lack of communication and the lack of exchange of the sort of financial documentation, the strategizing for the building, that it winds up negatively affecting the buildings, and it also affects the ability for the tenants and future shareholders to adequately operate their own building. So we would also recommend in this regard that the tenants be provided a direct mechanism for sponsor evaluation where they can provide feedback about the third-party managers. And additionally, we would ask that HPD create a mechanism so it would facilitate tenant and third-party manager meetings, whether they be quarterly, monthly, yearly, however. But we think it's very important that the tenants be incorporated in this process.
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Jason, and I'm going to talk about the affordability concerns that have come up in both the pre-conversion phase and post-conversion phase with our HDFC cooperatives. So first, regarding affordability of the rents and maintenance, during the pre-conversion phase, buildings will receive loans, and pursuant to the private housing finance law, HPD as a supervising agency is allowed to restructure the rents. And so rents in buildings that have had very, very low rents in the low hundreds of dollars per month may be increased to $1,000 or more. And so we've seen this quite often, and it's a real concern regarding the long-term affordability of the rents and later maintenance in these buildings. For existing tenants during the pre-conversion phase, HPD will offer Section 8 subsidies, assuming that the Section 8 subsidies are actually available. And this is great for tenants who receive those subsidies, but there are also tenants who maybe aren't eligible for Section 8, and these increased rents and later maintenance are a huge hardship for those tenants and later shareholders. The other issue regarding these restructured rents is that HPD only offers Section 8 at the initial point when the rents are restructured, but there's no requirement, commitment from HPD to preserve the long-term affordability of the rent or maintenance in these buildings. So as a quick example, a household maybe isn't eligible for Section 8 at the point when the rents are restructured. But maybe a couple of years later, their adult children move out, and then there's a drop in household income. Or maybe someone who was working becomes disabled. All of a sudden, their incomes drop, but there's no Section 8 available. And these tenants or shareholders are at jeopardy of eviction because they're no longer able to afford these rents that have been restructured by HPD. So we would like to see stronger requirements of the supervising agency to preserve the long-term affordability for these units. The second issue of affordability that I want to touch on is regarding the resale prices. So for some of the older HDFCs that don't have regulatory agreements, we've heard about resale prices that are very, very high and that don't meet the mission of what these cooperatives are for, which is to provide affordable housing to lower income New Yorkers. There's also an issue with the newer cooperatives that have formed. Even though the regulatory agreements may have resale caps, we've also noticed that a lot of the resale prices HPD is setting is also very, very high. So for example, we've seen buildings where shares are being sold for $100,000. And so that may seem affordable, but for lower income New Yorkers at the lower AMIs, that's not affordable, and it's very, very hard to get financing for loans to purchase HDFC co-ops for a number of different reasons. And so we would like to see HPD strengthen their commitment to providing resale caps on the sale of these shares. And so with that being said, we would like to continue working with your offices and working together to strengthen HDFCs in New York City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moya.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to what you just said. I think it's Adan?
Adon.
Adan? Walk me through the process of the translations of the documents. Is it mandated that these documents be translated, or is it that the only requirement that they're supposed to do is provide a translator at these forums that they have?
So to my knowledge, it's not required that it's translated. I think HPD has been having, if they're using a sponsor, they'll have someone there to just provide on-site translating. Sometimes it winds up being somebody from our office or otherwise, but it's not a requirement as far as I know.
And the translation is usually only in Spanish,
Correct.
if it's provided at all.
But for the documentation itself,
It's not
there's no
translated.
There's no
translations whatsoever.
That's correct.
Because that's something I think we should start looking into, examining. Yep. And just quickly, on the technical part of the training that you were talking about, what do you think that should look like? In the sense that you're saying that it's not enough that they're doing it. So what's the timetable that you think is a suitable amount? And is that an added cost that comes in?
So in terms of the timetable, I think I think it's a little bit hard to kind of say, in as much as many of these buildings wind up in the pre-conversion phase for years and years and years, unfortunately. But I do think that if there was a sort of like maybe a rotation or having in a period of, let's say, a year, having each month you'd be doing different trainings specific to certain issues, I think that could be very helpful and informative. I think the main issue, as I touched on when I was testifying, was just that there's oftentimes a large gap in terms of not only the information, but the time that you're actually getting these trainings. And what we've seen in our practice is that when you wind up hitting certain milestones in the actual process, of the conversion process, then either HPD or the sponsor will say, okay, time to get a bunch of training in, and all of you have to get this training done in these 3 days or this week or this month, and that winds up not being ideal.